Alright, so time to talk about how I feel about the Game of Thrones books. At least the ones I've read so far. This is going to be very brief, very quick, and I'm just going to do all four at once just because, one, to save time, and two, I don't have that much to say in each of them. I really like all the books I've read so far. I just finished Feast for Crows the other day, and I really like it so far. I really like how complex it is. I really like all the different plot lines going on. I very like how political it is. It's very reminds me very too much of Shakespeare. Like you have all this political intrigue, drama, love, betrayal, murder. It's like modern day Shakespeare, and I really like it. So first book, Game of Thrones, I really liked. Although I'm surprised how much I liked it because it's very slow. Like when it comes down to it, the first book is just one giant ass prologue. Like the entire thing is just here's this character. Sorry, that's my Xbox. And here's this character. We're gonna set him up, and then we're gonna move him somewhere so that way when stuff happens, they'll be doing stuff. And they do that for all the characters, and it's very slow, but at the same time, I kind of appreciates the calm before the storm. It's also the one time we get to see all the Starks together, which again, at the time, I really didn't think much of, but when you consider just how crazy and how spread out everyone is, you kind of gain a new appreciation of that moment. And when I watch the show, yes, I haven't watched the show yet. I want to read the books before I watch the show, and I want to read all the books that had come out prior to the show coming out. I gain a new appreciation for it. But yeah, it was like I generally enjoyed the characters. Like Game of Thrones is a very character driven book. It's not so much it's more about the characters in the story. And all the characters, well some of them are really interesting. Tyrion is really interesting, especially in Clash of Kings, especially in Storm of Swords I find him very interesting. And Arya really interesting. Book starting in book 2 is when once that the 700-page prologue that is the first Game of Thrones book is done, it gets a lot more interesting. A lot of characters start doing stuff. Arya's story is pretty interesting. Jon Snow's story gets a bit interesting, although I think it doesn't hit its peak until the third book. Everyone's story hits its peak in the third book. I'm trying to think what else was interesting. Just all the stuff with the Lannisters was pretty interesting, and then book 3, Storm of Swords. Oh my gosh, amazing! Every one story is like moving, doing stuff. Even Bran, who wasn't doing anything, versus doing stuff. Like the thing about Game of Thrones is there's so much stuff that I don't know where to start or go. But yeah, like everyone's doing stuff. The Lannisters is like a great political. It's like a great soap opera. Just seeing them all go back and forth, like Tyrion with Cersei and all this stuff was just really fascinating. And then, of course, we have the Omega insane number of plot twists that occur at the end of the third book, which, wow. And then we have, so yeah, book 3 is my favorite in case anyone's wondering. And then book 4, pretty good. I mean, not as good as Storm of Swords, but that's a hard book to follow up. But still, I mean, it's probably the weakest just in terms of the fact that not much happens. It's not much happens. It's the characters in it. Some of them are interesting. Like I like Brienne's story. I like Arya's story. I like Sansa's story. Even though nothing much happens in it, it's it was still interesting. Like even out of all the Game of Thrones books, this is the one where the least amount of stuff happens, and I feel like the least amount of big moments happen in it. But it was still interesting. I still found the story pretty fascinating. I still enjoyed the characters. But you thinking about it, especially when George R. R. Martin says he originally conceived this as a much bigger book, but he just decided to just he was toying with the idea of telling everyone's story and just cutting off at a halfway point. But then he thought it would flow much better if he just took half of the character stories, the ones focused more on Lannister focus, more King's Landing focus, and just focused on that story, and took the other half of the stories and made an entire book about that. Now, on one end, that's smart. It prevents the book story from feeling way too over the map. But at the same time, it's like looking at book 1, it's like it kind of feels incomplete. And I feel like once I read Dance with Dragons, like my perspective on Feast for Crows is going to change because I'm getting the whole picture. It's like, you know how in Birth by Sleep when you play through a character's story and you think you have the picture, and then you play through both all the character stories, and suddenly there's a huge, bigger picture that you never saw. I feel like that's gonna be me when I read Dance with Dragons, because there's all this stuff like Jon Snow, Tyrion, Daenerys, like all this stuff. There's probably big stuff that happens to those characters, but we never get to see it. Oh yeah, and then there's like I think Stannis's like place gets sacked, but we don't. We just hear about that. We don't get to see it, so it'll be interesting to see it. And that's all I have to say. Again, sorry if this is very short, rambling, impromptu, but it's been a while since I've read all the books, so I don't. Some of them aren't that fresh in my mind, but once I finish Dance of Dragons and when the other books come out, I'll talk about those. So those will be a bit fresher in my mind. And I'll probably have more to say. And yeah, so you're probably wondering why I'm doing all these vlogs. Well, you'll see in this video. I'm gonna upload like right after this one. So I'll see you then.